Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. Tonight's show, Kicking It. I'm your host, Rob. I'm broadcasting to you from the Indian Hill Studios in the Pinos Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. Tonight's movie, Policewoman, a.k.a. Young Tiger, a.k.a. Rumble in Hong Kong or something, a.k.a. whatever. I don't know. It's a movie that doesn't star Jackie Chan, but kind of sort of does, and it's from 1973. Martial arts film, Golden Harvest. Looking forward to talking about tonight with the one and only real Dr. Venkman. Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
I am doing great.
So, Doctor, I would just want to sit there and ask you point blank, what the hell made you want to pick this movie for tonight?
Well, it's Jackie Chan. It was free on YouTube. It's also on Netflix where I watched it.
Yes.
I've never seen it before. And then I saw that, like, he's got a giant freaking fake mole on his chin. So I'm like, oh, he's playing a bad guy.
Yeah, so those are like martial arts movies. We've covered, obviously, on Kicking It primarily. Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, JCVD, a bunch of others. And we've always wanted to do some martial arts films. So we've been talking about doing Jackie Chan, but some of the earlier ones. And so what's interesting about this film, it's Jackie Chan, while he's been in some films, even as early as the 60s a little bit, this is the first movie that he actually, I think, choreographed a lot of the stunt fight, as being a player in it, but he's not the main star of the film. It's just that after he blew up in the 80s that they decided to kind of remarket this with his name on it, because the real star of the show is actually, the name of the title, the policewoman there. And it's played by, and again, pardon my whatever in case I get it wrong, but Lin Chu. She's phenomenal in it. I guess she was in that Kung Fu Hustle movie, which to me, whatever. That's not my type of film, but she's fantastic in here. And this movie's kind of skeezy. It's kind of disgusting. It's kind of gritty and gutty for early 70s. Has a very funky feel to it with the music and score. But the martial arts are okay, and there's some decent scenes in it too. But this is for the hardcore Jackie Chan fans. And not only does he have this disgusting mole that in half the scenes he's in, it's falling off, he's playing a bad dude. And that's why I think, nobody's really heard about it, because he's known as a good guy and the lovable, likable comedy sort of character that we've all known Jackie Chan or think of when we think of Jackie Chan. But here, he's a bit of a bastard, Doctor. What do you think?
Well, like I said, this is early Jackie Chan before he actually became the hero in the stories. He took on so many roles, uncredited roles. Where this was actually him, just before he becomes the main star. He's just, the gang leader. That was his big role for this movie. So I love the fact that later in the years they renamed it. It was called Rumble in Hong Kong in the early 2000s because they want to
Rumble in the Bronx.
Because they want to capitalize on it and his success on his other movie, Rumble in the Bronx. They're like, whoa, we aim at Rumble in Hong Kong. Maybe people will watch it and like it. I'm thinking, Rumble in the Bronx is way better than this. But still, I like this. You got Charlie Chin in here. Charlie Chin.
Mm-hmm.
Georgian Chen.
That's Chin Chen.
It's funny. He changes the last letter of his last name for his character. Otherwise, it's exactly his name, Charlie Chin.
Cab guy is what I wrote down from
taxi driver.
Yeah.
I think he was actually pretty good here. I mean, the only thing, like I said, remember this is early 70s, martial arts stuff. So you're gonna get the boom, 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 boom when they hit each other. So that I know it's kind of cheesy, but I'm used to it now. It's it's better than it's better than the fake grunts go. No.
Well, definitely one thing that stands out, I think, for this film is, while you mentioned it's currently on Netflix, it's also for free on YouTube. It's not illegally or anything. For me, my experience was I tried looking at both on my accounts, and the quality of the print to me was standard def. It wasn't good. I would love to have seen this in a higher def because there's some interesting shots to it. But like I say, it's got an early 70s kind of funk score to it, which it's mixed in with a little bit of some Asian sounds that you think of Far East. And so it's kind of interesting that way. But the movie itself, I really wish I could have seen some of the scenes because unfortunately it looked like it was one of those things where sometimes I'd see half of somebody's face being cut off because of the way they edited it or clipped it. I'm not sure, but the aspect ratios looked a little weird. But that being said, the majority of it is still decent. It's obviously Hong Kong, which people who don't know about Hong Kong forget or those that do, how huge of a city it is and how tall those towers are on such small amounts of land. And Asia was such a big deal in the 70s in films. Think of The Man with the Golden Gun, who Lin Chu actually starred in as one of
she has a small role.
Yeah, she was one of the two girls that broke him out of the karate palace.
She was Hip's niece, Nara. She rescued,
yeah. So this movie kind of starts off as this taxi, the cab guy, Chin Chen. It starts off actually kind of good because you see the small group of people prowling on two people like making out in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere, which is dumb. But hey, you're in Hong Kong, that's what you do, I guess. And they're pretty rough, and they're kind of led by a kind of a hot, evil-looking woman. And there's some kick-ass scenes. The karate's good. And then, they get into they run off, they get assaulted, they get robbed or whatever. But the taxi cab guy basically gets this chick who's running away from this gang, but then she dies and he takes her to the hospital and all this stuff. And bottom line is the evil boss lord's recruiting hot chicks to run drugs. Okay, nothing complicated about it. Somebody's an imposter trying to act like, the one good chick, but, the inspector who goes through and kicks a lot of ass in here, played by Lin Chu, she's actually really solid. When she came on in the first scene and beats up the gang, I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. And again, early 70s. So that really stuck out to me is two things. One, having a strong female in it, but two, people forget that in the early 70s, a lot of martial arts films weren't necessarily, even though they were popular over in Asia, they weren't necessarily, their backdrop probably would be like 100 years ago, or in the Ming Dynasty, or this dynasty, or that, or whatever. They were like old films in a sense, as far as their setting. Of course, what I like too is at the time they said, no, we're going to make some movies that are set in modern times, and that's what I liked about it, because they use a lot of backdrops of Hong Kong. This movie's only it like a month, so it definitely makes from good scenes. And actually, one of my favorite scenes, Doctor, is there's a scene where the gang basically finds the taxi driver, and they're in this car driving around, and the taxi driver has no idea that this purse was hidden in his taxi cab, right? So he's like, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. And then they end up in a really neat place where they have this kind of fight, and it's like it's like a chase and a fight scene at like this tire factory, and they're like running up a big pile of rocks and then sliding down, and they're fighting with the little tires to go on the cars back then and stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool looking, actually, and there's a nice fluid motion to it. And also, one of the things we've talked about a lot with action movies that really kind of started, I'd say, in the 90s, is not these violent half-second cuts here and cuts here where you can't follow the action. Here you get a lot of shots of them fighting, and while it may be ninja style, it's still good because you can watch it, you get into the flow, and to your point, the sounds they make when they're hitting and moving are timed well, and everything else there too. So again, I think that's one of the strong points to this. What do you think?
I mean, I like the fact that they're still speaking Mandarin. It's not like you're trying to force one guy speaking actual English, and the rest of the others are all dubbed. I mean, this I didn't mind it being subtitled. To me, it felt more authentic that way when you actually watch the subtitles versus with the fake English. But I do like the fact that, like you said, remember, this is early 70s. Yes. I love stuff in the 70s. I didn't grow up in the 70s. I grew up in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So seeing this stuff, seeing the scenery and stuff, and then just the cars are driving. I thought it was funny that that's what you had back then in Hong Kong, especially if you could. Hong Kong was a big import city, but you got cars were mainly Toyotas or Suzukis, and so you see the gangs. The gangs are driving those little red cars. Yep. They're like, oh my gosh, they're like clown cars. There's like 4 or 5 get out of this car. I'm like, wow, this is so ridiculous. But that's what you had back then. They were, I'm thinking he's got that big old freaking little taxi. He can just run one off the road.
Well, twice in the movie that's a big thing where they're taking the car and he's trying to run the gang members over, and then he's backing up and trying to run them over. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. And obviously it sets it up for some acrobatics and stuff, but it's not what I would call a flip-floppity movie. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's not Jackie Chan, because Jackie Chan's maybe got 5-10 minutes of screen time in here. And actually, I didn't watch. I watched the dub version, so I didn't. I got somebody with a baritone speaking, for Jackie Chan, which added a little sense of evil to
him.
Really? Jackie's got that light, playful singing operatic voice, because that's how he was trained in the opera school. So I thought, I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. And like I said, I know they've buried the movies because they don't want to have Jackie Chan thought of as a bad dude. But again, he's a minor character in here. He gets his ass handed to him by a cab guy at the end. And what's kind of cool too is there's a few scenes in here between takes of them. Of the cab guy and policewoman teaming up to find out what's going on and going up to the boss lair. There's some scenes where he's sit down and he's just chilling with his cab buddies, and it's cool because they like want to help him out and stuff. And another thing that stuck out to me too is I was trying to place it because it's not an American film. So when we talk about feminism, it may mean different things in different cultures at the time in the early 70s. But there's a scene in there where a lady mistakes this woman for being pregnant and makes some comment about having an abortion and, promiscuous sex out of wedlock. And I'm like, what? What the hell's this in here for? I don't get it. It kind of struck me as odd. And then there's another scene in there too where all the guys are talking or whatever. And I thought, well, they're talking about having all these socialist programs and stuff. And I don't know how much of that's propaganda because, again, it's a Hong Kong film, and Hong Kong was under British control until the 1998, 1999 when they had to cede it back to China or whatever it was. And so with communism, I think, picking up in the 50s and 60s in that country, I just wasn't sure how much it got in there. So forget, what your politics are, or maybe if you're really hardcore into it, maybe that's a note of interest, but it just stuck out as filler in the episode because the really cool scene too at the end is when they're having the big fight is his taxi cab buddies all kind of show up at the last minute to even the odds against the gang so they can kick ass like one big group.
Well, that was cool because they called him and the cop lady, they called him on like the little thing, and you're like, yeah, like, where we at? We're here. Like, all right, was ready to rumble, bros. I swear, I like another martial art movie did that, and I think it might have been a Jackie Chan movie, where right, he had his buddies come to help him out.
Yeah, now Golden Harvest obviously had been around for a long time, and Shaw Brothers are two main studios that have done a lot of martial arts movies. So maybe they might have had some actors on loan for each other and stuff. So without going into the history of it, I think Golden Harvest, or one of the two companies, I think used to have a documentary on Netflix about their history, which I've heard is very good. Some of our listeners on Kicking It have mentioned that, you might want to check that out. And I think the same thing with Cannon Films too, because Cannon Films in the 80s was a godsend. Chuck Norris, Arnold, a lot of people. So it's kind of interesting to sometimes check those things out if you're a super hardcore fan. For us on Kicking It, it's one of our flagship programs. It's been very popular, especially with the audience that we have on action films, not just American, but we have a lot of Asian influences. So it was always interesting for me to hear some of the tidbits that people would pop in the commentary about these films. But yeah, it's interesting because Jackie Chan, obviously, to me, doesn't seem like somebody that would want this film to come out. There's plenty of actors that sometimes are ashamed or for whatever reasons don't particularly care for some of their earlier work. And to me, this is one of those films. It's not a great film. It's not horrible. It's a B-level film. One of the things, though, I like is you have, I guess, what's called a zoom shot where, the camera shows somebody's face and all of a sudden it zooms in really, really, really hard, but then it will zoom back out. And in here, there's several extended fight sequences where you're getting the zoom ins or the crash zooms, and then they're fighting and you see somebody's face and you hear some music and then they zoom back out and it's still one continuous shot where you can see a lot of the action happening. And that's very fluid. And I think that helps. And I definitely think that not just the choreography, but the way they film it makes it a little bit better than it should be. Because even though you can kind of tell a little bit where they're missing some of their marks on the punches, it's still very fluid. And it's kind of missing, I think, a lot in today's action. What do you think about the fight scenes?
Like I said, this is typical what you'd see in later movies with Jackie Chan. I almost and the choreography in this, the fighting in this, is basically is the same style that Jackie Chan uses in his movies. Because the policewoman in here, she was actually trained under the same master as Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung.
Yes, and she's really good in here. She doesn't come across as like, say, one of the girls in where you go, okay, she just looks like an actor doing the karate moves. No way.
Yeah,
she's really great in here. She's fantastic.
This is Hong Kong, bro. This isn't America where everything's fake.
Well, I wonder how early on there was a strong woman in there, because I know that there's films in the 50s and 60s. So as we dive more into Asian martial arts cinema, not just Shaw Brothers, let's say, or Golden Harvest, but all around them. And we've experimented with a few to see about that theme, because it doesn't have that American taint to it, to your point, where you go, okay, super hot woman that, can't kick ass. And, we've talked about doing a Cynthia, Rothrock movie or female prison movies from the 80s, those types. We've also talked about how Gina Carano looks good on film, but can do it. We've talked about, of course, Amy in Lady Bloodflight, how that's a good one. So there's definitely women that can do it. And it's nice when you can actually watch them do it. And it's not about how hot they are. It's about, them being graceful and to be able to kick a little ass and be believable doing it. Not like, she's 100 pounds and, is beating 40 guys. No way. Lynn Chute delivers in here. She's really the show. And the cab guy, Chin Chen, the actor, Charlie Chin, I should say is the actor. He's, to your point, I was going, wait a minute, is this the guy? Am I supposed to be rooting for him? And it wasn't until about 15, 20 minutes and I went, oh, I don't think Jackie's going to be in here a lot, because Netflix will deceive you like they do with everything. They put his name on the poster and they basically say, oh, it's him and this and that. It's not Jackie Chan.
It's because he's the main actor that everybody knows. These other ones are kind of nobodies.
Yeah.
And that's why they did it, which I don't mind. Like I said, just the fact to see him in a movie where he's not the leading role is actually interesting too.
Well, we'll say this. I'm not a Jackie Chan historian. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I like him. I think he's okay. I prefer more of the practical effects, which I do appreciate in his films. Like I say, you see some really good stuff in here. So hats off to him for the good choreography and the fight scenes. Those are pretty good. What I also liked about this film, for me, for my personal taste, and which I think is a positive about this film, is that it doesn't have that comedy effect that we get to know Jackie Chan about, or all those acrobatics where it's kind of funny and creative. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That he does in his films. I'm simply saying this film does not really have it. So if you're looking for that, going, oh, it's a Jackie Chan film, I can't wait till he does something funny with the tire or this or that, not going to see it. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a positive thing to it. It gives it a little bit more of a grittier feel to it, because it's not a bunch of rich people, a bunch of taxi cab guys, and they get caught up in something with drug lords, and that's really it. There's no palatial estates, and there's no pimp mobiles like we're in America or any of that kind of stuff at all. It's just.
I gotta say though, when I first started watching this, and I was looking at the mole, I'm like, is that supposed to be a mole in his face, or is that like some kind of custom thing they had back in like the 70s? I looked it up. I'm like, no, it's actually a fake mole.
Well, yeah. Chops were a big deal. Not maybe the Asians didn't have them as much as Americans, but I'm looking at going, okay, I need to see the other side of his face. But this mole is like half the side of his cheek. It looks like I don't know what the hell it looks like. It looks like
I looked at some other people's reviews earlier today about the movie, and they're saying like, oh yeah, it's like, imagine him being a guy who eventually becomes famous, but you had to start out wearing a giant thing on your chin for a movie. so it's like, right? How many people would actually getting paid scraps? Because Jackie Chan, he said when he worked to age 40, and that's age 40 is when he basically became famous. Yep. Up at that point, he did all his stuff, just making ends meet. So he was doing movie after movie after movie after movie. He has a wife and a son. He got the point where he got obsessed with it. He's getting hurt. His back's getting messed up and everything. And finally, he get the big Western movie. Finally, got his break when he's 40 years old. Yep. So when he's doing all this stuff in the 70s, it's like wow, he's in his 20s, and you can see some of the stuff he does. And like some of the stuff, it looks like it hurts, and we're not seeing the bloopers. So we're not seeing, Jackie Chan movies. See at the end, they always show where he hurts himself, or like in Police Story, where he did that chandelier thing. He actually burned his hands coming down that rope light in the mall.
Yeah, there's definitely some more films of his that we've talked about doing, and that's a great one too. And I think him doing it, even though it's kind of a comedy thing, at that time in his career, here in early 70s, to your point, I think somehow, if we're not used to watching old martial arts films, sometimes you may not appreciate just how difficult it can be to look so graceful and so fluid. It's like a great athlete, it looks so easy and simple, and that's very hard to do.
Yeah, because I was reading about that on especially in Police Story. He had the point where he actually almost lost his hands.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because he cut himself up and he burned everything. It's just like wow, and he's getting little shocks, zaps every time he's going down. He would pop one, he got zapped. They only filmed it once. So.
Yeah, this is just, like I say, it's a grade B type film. There's nothing special about it. It's not a long film. It's maybe 70, 75 minutes, 80 tops, I'm guessing. It's not even 90 minutes, I don't think. Again, it's showing on Netflix currently. It's also on YouTube for free. There's a couple different streams. I think the ones I've seen were dubbed, but they're watchable. I mean, and the print quality is the same on each, so you definitely can check them out. Obviously, seeing this on DVD or Blu-ray would be more desired. That being said, it is what it is, and it's okay. It's nothing horrible. I've seen much worse in modern day films than something like this too. But yeah, I would say if you're a fan of Jackie Chan or just want to check something out, the interesting thing is that he plays a bad guy. You can look at him and go, oh, he's so young in here that I just see if I age him a couple years in my mind, that's Jackie Chan. But then you start to recognize, like, it's like your children. You can pick them out of an audience really well, even if you can't quite get a full vision because the way they move, it's ingrained in your head. And you go, yeah, that looks like a Jackie Chan move the way he's doing. But
I still like this movie. It's still a movie worth watching once, or twice. But I love the little chase scenes in here. I love the fight scenes in here. You tell it's choreography, because they take turns, But how fast, like even with the girl when she's fighting, and like the beginning before you see the taxi cab guy,
yep,
the policewoman, she's like how fast those guys are coming up, and you can tell they did not speed up the footage. That's just them going that fast.
That's a good point. Yeah, you don't get the James Bond effect here. I mean, it looks really good that way too. Like I say, to throw a woman out there basically early on to kick a little ass and not rub it in kind of American style or anything. Just as a matter of fact, it's pretty cool. I will say this too, that I'm a fan of, and I'm not going to say it's this way in all martial arts movies. When you're a kid watching it, I just thought it was just like magnificent to watch, the mastery of your body and different forms and methods, and you don't pick your genetics, but you can work on your body and things that match up. So I always marked out over like the different styles and techniques and how they were applied, because like we say, it's like boxing. It makes for a good matchup. It makes for a good confrontation, a good fight. But this movie to me and several others I've seen, kind of culturally, I have a fantasy in my mind as an American viewer going, wow, what's it like to be able to grow up where even if you're a lowly peasant type farmer or middle class taxi cab driver, average Joe guy just trying to make ends meet no matter what country you're in, where everybody, it seems like even the 4-year-old little girl chewing gum at the mall or the store has some sort of mastery of kung fu to some level that matches them. And so no matter where you go, everything is sorted out, not by knives, guns, or any of that kind of stuff. It's by going one-on-one with somebody with kung fu. And I know it's not real, but that's the fantasy in my mind that I like seeing. So I can kind of let the ninja style go out of the way and go, oh, that's not real. As soon as they'd hit the ground, he'd choke them out. None of that stuff. I do kind of like this, and it's kind of neat. And that's where I appreciate how women can get involved in it and do it too. And yeah, it'll be fun to talk more about some of Jackie Chan's other films, as well as other ones from Golden Harvest, Shaw Brothers, and so on too. Yeah, really looking forward to it. Any final thoughts there, Doctor, about this film before we close up for the night?
Not really. I think it's a one and done film. Like I said, it's I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying it's just Jackie Chan starting out in his career. It's something interesting to see because you never see that. I always see him as a star character, or like, oh, he's got the big lead role. So he's so seeing him before he's famous, became doing the grunt work. Even when you see him uncredited, he's in the Bruce Lee movies.
Yep.
It's interesting to see characters before they're famous. So yeah, definitely check this out.
Yeah, so I titled it Policewoman because to me that's really what the movie's about in the picture, even though it's Jackie Chan's and it's got several other names. Like I say, currently shown on Netflix and free on regular YouTube. RDV, I'd like to thank you for showing up. Go ahead.
I like to call it Young Tiger.
Young Tiger, that's the other title. Yes, of course. I'm looking at this film going, I don't see anybody young and nobody's a tiger. I mean, maybe if they had Sexy Tigress on it, I don't know.
That cab driver, he had the eye of the tiger.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for showing up, Doctor. Thanks for listening, guys, and getting the word out, sharing it too. Hope you've enjoyed it. Looking forward to doing some more martial arts movies on Kicking It for the Doctor, myself, and everybody involved. Have a good night, and as always, stay extreme.
Good night, people.